All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining another Mentor Core moment here. Today we have the amazing Asha Palmer. My name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. I am a compliance, ethics, and corporate governance strategist, and I run Lumen Worldwide Endeavors, which helps organizations put values into action. I am the co-founder of MentorCore, and MentorCore is a community that is built for compliance, security, and risk professionals to find mentoring relationships, to share some of the struggles and massive accomplishments that go along with being in this profession. And every week for months now, we have been
It's coming dangerously close to a year now.
I know it's getting close. It's so close, but I'm not saying a year yet.
No.
We're going to celebrate the year for a year when it arrives. But we have been having guests come on to talk about their journeys. That can include like how you navigate a matrixed organization or things that have been learned along the way. MentorCore is a place for us to be able to connect with each other. And I am thrilled to have my co-founder here, Dan.
Hey,
Can you
Lisa Beth.
introduce yourself?
I've already interjected, so I guess I'll introduce myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Ayala. I am I'm a chief information security officer and privacy officer, and founder of Socratic, a consultancy focused on bringing those services to smaller and medium businesses that may not need a full-time CISO or privacy officer, but have the same, if not greater, risks. But I think, along with that, one of the best parts of my week is being able to bring these Mentor Core events to everybody. It's been such a rewarding way to spend the last not quite a year. And I've gotten to meet so many wonderful people, and today is absolutely no exception to that. Asha Palmer, welcome.
Thank you.
It's
So good to
great to
be
have you here.
great to be here. Should I introduce myself?
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
so first things first, we always love when people in the audience ask questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, in the Q&A. Dan and I are always watching it and trying to make sure that we answer those burning questions. But before we get there, Asha, you're amazing. Tell us all about you.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. I know we'll get some time to reflect on this, but mentors I feel like have gotten me where I am. And so, thinking about relationships and being mentors and being mentored is such a great thing. And so that's a great journey that you both are on. So thank you for having me. Who am I? That's such a difficult question to answer, most of the time. And, it's interesting as we think about the not quite a year yet, right? Like, who was I a year ago versus who I am now? And I think, the constant thing I try to do is always evolve. So I grew up in Sacramento, California, and wanted to see the world. And so you will see along my journey that I love Sacramento, great place to grow up, but I wanted to get out and see because I thought other people's perspectives and to understand the world was really to help the world. I always had a calling on my life that I wanted to do something meaningful. I also really liked The Cosby Show. And so I watched The Cosby Show over and over again. And I wanted to be Claire Huxtable. So she was a lawyer. So I became a lawyer. And since I was always right and loved to argue, I went to law school. So was that laughing at me always being right?
No, I think that's definitely a lawyer thing, right? You are in good company.
It is. So I went the traditional path of being a lawyer. And in that, I worked at a law firm. And then I went to the Department of Justice to kind of do something more meaningful with my litigation background. And then I moved across the world with my husband to Abu Dhabi, where he had an opportunity of his lifetime. And I was on this trajectory or this path, right? We all have our lives planned out. And it never works out the way we have it planned, which I think is the most amazing thing, right? And so we took a risk and we moved across the world, and I couldn't be the traditional litigator that I was. And it was in Abu Dhabi that I discovered ethics and compliance, and had to articulate why the skills I had gained in law school and otherwise were sufficient enough for this profession, and maybe even a bit of a breath of fresh air. So that's the short version of who I am. I also have 3 children, ages 6, 4, and 2. And so this pandemic has been a gift, and a gift.
An extra special gift.
And currently, I must say, I'm Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer for Conversant, which offers ethics and compliance technology.
Which
Very
is
cool.
amazing. And you guys host Converge every year,
We do.
which was such a breath of fresh air. So that was really exciting to see. And this was your first Converge as the CISO, right?
It was. And if anyone has met me, and I hope what you will learn about me over the next hour is that I like to shake things up. I like to get us thinking beyond sort of what is given to us, because I believe that is the key to the evolution that this profession needs, that we as individuals need, and that energy and that connection to really move us forward. So Converge is a vehicle for that. And we try to bring the things we need to talk about, but also to have some fun. Like, we as human beings hopefully like to have fun. I mean, you guys probably came on hearing us talk about music. Like, I'm always down for a dance party, right? And we can do both by being that personable ethics and compliance officer that is really having those tough conversations, but also knows when to let up a bit.
So let me ask you, you moved across the world and then you started in compliance and ethics. So how was it starting in compliance and ethics in a faraway land?
Great question. And you would think, right? I actually did an ethics 101 training for some of our employees today, and just talking about the rich history of ethics and compliance in the US, it begs the question as to why I would start over there as well, right? But I came into ethics and compliance being open, right? I wanted to understand it. And my first experience was as a teacher. So I started teaching business ethics at a university in Dubai. And what I saw in that teaching was the gap between what people needed to know and what they were willing to learn.
Mm.
And the gap that was there, in my opinion, was because of the way it was being taught. When I was handed that curriculum, I didn't want to teach it, let alone think that anyone who's 22 in Dubai would want to learn. And so it was a challenge to me to say, this is the most important subject anyone in business school can learn. How do I bring that importance in a way that's engaging and brings an emotional connection that people take it with them in their roles wherever they go, right? And so when I thought about it, I looked, and one of the projects that I instituted was having them look at codes of conduct of organizations and saying, would you want to learn that? Would you want to teach that? How can we really put some energy into it to make it stick? And so that challenge invigorated my desire to say, what can we do better and differently? I think starting that journey in the Middle East, particularly where it's not highly regulated, was very important for me, because rules have never worked for me as an individual. You tell me do something, I'm going to figure out how to do something different, right? Like, some people are very rule based. I'm not, right? I didn't steal because there was a rule. I didn't not steal because there was a rule saying don't steal. I didn't steal because I didn't want to get caught and go to jail, right? And so, like, you have to figure out what people's trigger points are. And some people are really responsive to the stick, and other people need the carrot. And so I think when you're in a very not so regulated environment, you have to really incentivize people to want to do the right thing, as opposed to beating them over the head with the fact that they have to do the right thing. And I think there's a balance there that was very important for me to enter the profession with, because I believe that there is a natural ebb and flow between the two that creates the right formula.
So global business and global compliance, the fact that you came into this realm not in the US, but now you're back in the US, how have you had to adjust or adapt your style and approach based on different definitions of ethics and compliance around the world? And and painting that, especially when we all have to adhere under one, US based organizations have to follow US rules no matter where we are in the world. But that may not be the culture. Having been out there, you've seen more of that. Any thoughts on that, or how to start putting your arms around that?
Yeah, I was privileged to work for an organization that wanted to implement best practices, right? And so the rule by which we measured ourselves were often US based, right? So if you looked at anything the DOJ was putting out, and having been at the DOJ for a short period of time, we were leading in best practices, right? But to me, it's necessary frameworks that you have to put in place regardless of where you are, that haven't changed for me. We were putting those frameworks. The company I worked for wanted to be better, wanted to be compliant, wanted to have a world-class program. And so I was very privileged that while not working for a US company, I had a company that wanted to be the benchmark where we were. And so looking at, interestingly, what I have learned coming back is that not all organizations in the US have that same desire, which was
I'm
very
shocked by that.
shocking to me.
You know what? I just had a conversation with Dan about this. I'm like, if you are talking to a company and they're like, yeah, we don't care about best practices, we're going to do homegrown and we do our own thing all the time, and we don't care what's out there, like, does that make you feel warm and fuzzy? Does that make you just like, look for the exit as soon as you can? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
what do you do when you're faced with that, during an interview, or maybe if you get into an organization and it's like, yeah, we don't want to, we're not striving for a B plus, we're actually striving to just eke it out D minus.
Yeah. And what
D's
we
get
hear,
degrees.
right? Check the box programs, or things that are really just looking to formulaically respond to things and not actually make changes. And it's quite disappointing in that, we are setting the standard and maybe not following it. That said, I do believe that there's a desire, and that's why these connections become so important, right? That's why Mentor Core is so important, because you can't change someone overnight. So if you find yourself in an organization that really you thought was, progressive, but just wants to check the box, how do you then navigate your space in that? How do you navigate a different way to get to your message? How do you advocate for resources? How do you make that argument in a way that may change the mindset and help evolve that organization? And so we've all been there before or worked with someone that's been there. And so we have those tools that will help you navigate as to frameworks you can put in place that will help move the needle, right? And it's funny, because I was talking to an organization about their annual compliance planning, right? And I was like, you're not going to be able to do everything in 1 year, right? So think and prioritize what you want to do, right? Where is the risk? What is most important to you? And I am such a compliance officer that advocates for compromise. And so, thinking about it, now I'm not saying compromise on high risk stuff, right? And bet your business stuff. Please don't do that. But is there something that you can is there some wiggle room in what you've recommended versus what the business wants to do that doesn't create additional risk? And if there is, building that alliance and that relationship is so important for the long term, and to having people understand the things that are really important to you, and the nice to haves versus the have to haves.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, what I'm hearing from this is, right, just because they say they don't want best practices doesn't mean that there's not negotiation room there. It means that maybe they, from a cultural perspective, consider best practices to be outsider approaches, and you have to come in with an insider approach to help them understand and bridge that gap. And that there's still, some opportunity to potentially learn and grow there until there maybe isn't, or right, a little more exploration could be in order.
Yeah. And I think being honest with yourself, right? My life, and Lisa Beth, you and I have talked about this often, has been one of transition, right? I mean, I told you, I left the law firm to go to DOJ. I left DOJ to go to Abu Dhabi. In Abu Dhabi, I was originally working for Coca-Cola. I taught while I was working for Coca-Cola. I then worked for this other company. I started my own company. Like, you just have to admit whatever point it is, why something is not working for you, and move on. And there will be all of those reasons. And for me, I've always been unapologetically authentic to myself and my family to say, this isn't working, right? Or on to the next thing, and not having that sort of linear path that I thought I would have, and being okay with some of the ambiguity, because I do believe that it leads you back to exactly where you're supposed to be.
I love that. So let's talk about being unapologetically authentic.
Ooh.
And I know that people are listening in, and they're dying to know, and I'm sure you're dying to tell them, what's this whole chocolate unicorn about?
Well, so Chocolate Unicorn started as an idea by my daughters. And my daughters, I was actually traveling in my consulting business. I was away. And my daughters just sent me a message, a video message before they went off to school, and said, we're signing off Chocolate Unicorn. And when I
Like, all right, there we go.
and it was 2 days in a row until I said, you sit on it for a little bit. And I had talked to them, what does Chocolate Unicorn mean? And they said, it's magical. It's authentic. They didn't use that word, but it's fun. We like it. It's a person we want to hang out with. Those were their descriptors of what a chocolate unicorn was. And then they said, and she looks like me.
I'm a chocolate one.
Oh, we have a chocolate unicorn in our presence.
Hello and welcome.
That's terrific.
And
On
they,
cue.
and they, on cue. And they said, and she looks like me. And I said, well, okay. And we've never seen a chocolate unicorn look like me. And so when I dug deeper into it, they were talking about the unicorns that they saw on apparel, on backpacks, on all of the merchandise. If anyone in here has kids, they know it's like unicorn, 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 right? And to them, what they saw was a unicorn that did not look like them. And that broke my heart, because I've seen unicorns that look like them. I've seen my mother, I've seen my grandmother, I've seen great women in history that I would classify as chocolate unicorns. And I don't always see them. It's not about the color of their skin, right? Unicorns are magical, right? They have this like rainbow hair that is just, to me, a sign of everything they've been through, right? And the magic that we need to get through this life. And so in the midst of pandemic, right? Like, where many of us have 25 different hats, right? That magic to me needed to be represented and shown in a way that my children could represent and connect to. And so Chocolate Unicorn, we started an apparel business and we had wrapping paper and we did all these things, but it's not about the merchandise. It's about the ability to see your own inner magic and be okay with reflecting that, because the world validates that and you and everyone around you will validate it too.
That's great.
I love that.
Wonderful message.
We all need a little more magic, don't we?
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'll take some magic, right? I mean, I tell you, it is only magic that has allowed us to get through this last almost a year, right?
Yeah.
And you just think about it, like it has to be, whether you did everything well, which none of us did, whether your children now eat cookies in the morning, which mine do, right? And I used to have a no TV during the week rule. I'm like, just get out of my face. And you know what? That's okay. And I think, just realizing that we are all magical has been so powerful for me, a reminder for me, and an image I always want to remind everyone else of.
I love that. So we got a question in the Q&A, and it is, how have you turned best practices into something that works for the organization that doesn't do best practices in the past?
Yeah. So I think a good tactic, again, on the value of relationships, is telling stories, right? So, like, I like to tell stories. I mean, I think we all do in general, and how other people are doing it, right? So I always say, like, even if we don't want best practices, we want to be like someone, right? So, like, if you tell me Michelle Obama does something, there's a more likelihood that I'm going to move toward that. And so, how do you tell a story about impact that will resonate that will make someone want to do that, right? And so whether it's protecting against risk, whether it's building company loyalty, whether it's a company that's been able to turn their data into actionable results, right? How do you tell that story? And I'll give you an example. We at Conversant just launched a DE&I initiative. And DE&I in tech tends to be pretty rare, actually, unfortunately. And we have launched this initiative. We're trying to figure out what is our journey, right? And so it's similar to what I do when people come to me and say, I want to redo my code of conduct. I say, well, how do you want to redo your code of conduct? And the answer is usually, well, I don't know. And you do market research. I like this. I want that. That looks good. Oh, this is what they're doing. So to start our DE&I journey, I went and looked at what other technology companies are doing.
Mhm.
How are they reporting DE&I? What does their program look like? What are the practices? And collating those, right? We all want to be a bigger, better, badder company, right? Correlating those and telling the story of the people we want to be like are doing this. And that is and they're doing this because. And interestingly, some of the companies that I looked at what they're doing, I reached out on LinkedIn to the individuals doing that and said, how are you doing this?
So
And
you literally, you didn't know them before, but you just reached out and you said, hey, I think what you're doing is cool. I want to know more. And did that tactic work for you?
It works.
All right, everyone's hearing it here. Like, take the time, reach out and touch somebody via the LinkedIn.
Right.
It
On the
works.
flip side, if you don't ask, you'll never get an answer.
True.
Closed mouth doesn't get fed is what I grew up
I
hearing,
like that.
right? The closed mouth don't get fed, right? And interestingly, I took that approach when I was looking for a job as well. When I was in the Middle East trying to find everyone knew I wanted a job. And I think oftentimes we're so prideful that I'm looking for a job. I don't want anyone to know. Well,
Right.
if no one knows, how are they going to give you the job they have because they don't know you want it?
And this was before the open to work little here I am, hear me roar, right? It was Was it all outreach and just, hey, hey team, hey family, hey friends, I am out here and I am looking, let me know.
Well, I think I was a little more intentional about the means in which I expressed it. So, that was when we could actually see people in person and go to events. And so I looked
Unlike now.
Novel.
but there's still events, right? And
There
so,
are still events.
I went to events and I was very honest, compliance events, ethics conferences, those kind of things, to have the conversations and to offer value, right? So I feel like sometimes it's always if you're looking for a job, people are just kind of telling people just that. You can also show your value in those settings, right? So if you have something to offer to the discussion, offer it up. And then people will see the value that you can provide to their company as well. And that is exactly how I got my job, right? I had said previously I was looking for it. I was in a setting where they were talking about anti-corruption enforcement, and I offered value. And so I think it's just so important to be present and also to show your value, because people latch on to that. I don't want to leave though the LinkedIn connection thing.
Yeah.
It does work when you're authentic and when you're vulnerable. And I think one of the things that triggered for me with Lisa Beth, when you said, you're doing something really cool and I want to learn about it, right? That's vulnerability. Because number one, it gives someone else a compliment, which sometimes is hard pressed to find, to say I'm watching it, and what everyone likes to hear on the other side. And two, the vulnerability to say, I don't know about that, but I want to learn. I just did that with ESG. ESG is this new big thing, right? Most of us are in compliance, security. We're like, where do we fit? What does
Yeah.
this new whole doctrine that's coming over here, how does that merge with us? How are corporations doing it? What's the like? There's so many questions I have that I don't even know the answer. I reached out to a company that's doing it well. The CICO has actually transferred into that position. I just said, I want to know, like, I don't understand it.
Right.
We had a great 45-minute conversation on International Women's Day.
Rock
And
on.
it was just so invigorating, because she was able to admit she doesn't know everything about it either, but she's on the journey. And so now it's great because she and I are on the journey together. Now she's way ahead of me, but I'm tagging along. I'm gonna hold on as long as I can.
And for those of you who are listening who haven't heard the term ESG before, let me peel it back a little bit. ESG is an area that is known as environmental, social, governance, and there are lots of different definitions for what fits into all of the buckets. And there are debates about, is technology its own factor? Is it included in there? Is data included in there? What do these things look like? So it is absolutely an emerging space. Some people call it sustainability, some people call it corporate responsibility, but it's that whole set of things from climate change to diversity, equity, and inclusion to what the board knows about and how they're interacting.
All things.
All the things. All the things.
All
I
the
like to call it how a company moves.
That's
Right,
good.
it's not the purpose of the company, but it's the how it gets done, and how a company navigates those decisions. So very closely aligned to values, but
Yes.
not quite values.
I'll tell you, one of the things I learned in that discussion, particularly, was for us in our profession, either you will lead it, either you will lead your company's efforts to understand how they move, or you will be an input into it. And either way, you need to understand it so that your inputs into it are valuable, right? Because you don't want someone who's over it to say, oh, the compliance data isn't really up to par, right?
Right,
And then if you're leading it, to understand how to navigate it.
absolutely. And in the chat, there was a comment that said, authenticity is unfortunately so rare, but we love to see and hear it.
I just I don't know how we move forward ever, like in ethics and compliance or otherwise, without that authenticity, right? Because it's what builds the connection to us and our programs and really shows the value that we are authentically trying to help people and help companies. And I think delivering that message authentically, being vulnerable in that message is so important, that I don't know how we really move forward without it.
So
Yeah, and I
it
think it's been
takes,
tough
go
for a
ahead.
lot of people to, those types of interactions happen in small sessions in private cloistered discussions. But the
Not at
bridge of
scale.
making them more public is definitely it is a big leap off an edge in business culture. Historical business culture has never been supportive of that.
Yeah,
And
I know. Go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to say, one of the things that I think is becoming actually an even bigger challenge right now is there are actual, almost physical manifestations of brand, and brand is invulnerable. And there are all of these different things like the Instagram highlight reels
Yeah.
that are encouraging people to never let them see you sweat, all of these different adages that are just actually counterproductive to that authenticity and vulnerability.
And often goes the other way, right? To
Absolutely.
being inauthentic because, I mean, and I just use DE&I as an example because I think it's the most present one, right? And it's like your statements are great, but your numbers are terrible. So that, like, there's a lack of, as opposed
Disconnect.
as opposed- there's disconnect, as opposed to just saying our numbers are terrible, we know it, and we're trying to do something about it. Like, that's what I would rather you say than, something else. And so I think that I look at too, right? I know we've had a lot of debate within our profession as to, do you share investigation outcomes, right? Do you share near misses, ethical failures, those types of stories within your organization? And it's always been no, 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 right? For a long time. There are some organizations who are making the shift, anonymize it if you need to, right? But because they're realizing that there's a value in admitting that we are not doing everything as perfect and up to the standards that we would want. And that story has to be told in order for there to be growth, for there to be shared learning, and for there to be greater accountability. Because then everyone understands that problem and everyone can be held responsible. I look at ethics and compliance as changing behavior and building accountability.
So
And we have to do both of those, not just
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So you're both attorneys. So this leads me to a question, and I'm not an attorney, but I do work with them a lot and have had really good relationships. But oftentimes the balance of the discussion goes, how transparent should we be? Ergo, we take on unnecessary legal risk by exposing things that may not be publicly out there already, or those kinds of things. How do you balance that? That transparency need for greater societal learning with the risks and implications of doing so to the organization itself.
It's all you.
It's an exercise in exactly what we do on a daily basis, right? Which is risk tolerance. And so I think what's most important about what you said, Daniel, is going through that analysis, right? And so instead of shutting it down as we're just not going to do that, go through that analysis. Is there actual legal risk, or is it we just don't want to share that we did something?
Fear of, oh yeah.
Is there, and so go through that analysis. And I do think that risk tolerance is important. I was, as an outside consultant, I did a major bribery investigation, right?
I'm glad you used the word investigation and not just I did a major bribery.
It was prolonged.
Keyword. We had to think about that. I had to lead the organization after the wrap of sharing that and who to share it with, who there was legal and regulatory obligation to share it with. as well as if you're already going to disclose it to the regulators that you need to disclose it to, then you should disclose it to the company, right? Because the company wants to believe that something is being done about it.
Right.
Right.
And that's the problem with, particularly some of the big cases that do actually bring some liability. No one shares what happened within the company. And so the employees have this disconnect with whether their company is actually concerned about doing the right thing or whether they just want the regulators off their back. And so I think that can have extreme cultural implications that the ethics and compliance officers should be leading and guiding the company through that. Obviously with strong consultation with everyone, but they're and articulating what the benefits of sharing those learnings are as well.
And just as
Yeah.
transparency breeds trust with customers, transparency breeds trust with employees too. And we thought we talk a lot about the external pieces of that, but employees are costly to bring on, and it's costly when they leave. And building trust builds an organization that is more cohesive. I love your answer. Thanks, Asha.
Yeah. And I will just add to that I think that there is a necessary tension between compliance, ethics, legal, privacy, security. Like, and part of the thing that I always kind of worry about or spend more time thinking about is how do you cultivate proper tension that results in constructive dialogue instead of blaming, shaming, capitalizing on this concept of failure as opposed to, opportunity and learning. And I think that's something like as a society we've just struggled with a lot. But I continue to see struggles in this space for compliance and ethics officers as well.
I think for me, starting with the why, and this is always a running joke at Conversant, is Asha's going to ask you why. You need to articulate it in the first few words, right? Why are we doing this? What do we want to come out of this? Why is this necessary for us to do XYZ? Like those are the important, tensions that will bring out constructive dialogue about the right way to approach it. Because if you're not aiming toward, a solution or an outcome, right? We always talk about positive business outcomes. Like we should have a positive business outcome or cultural outcome. I think maybe I'll phrase that positive cultural outcomes, right? That we want to achieve by doing things. And so I think it's so important to think about, I'm not sharing it just for the sake of sharing it. I'm sharing it. Is it to deter? Is it to invoke emotion? Is it to get people angry? Is it to, what's the why? And I think then you can get toward the right solution.
Terrific. So I'm going to take us back to the theme of trust and transparency. So one of the things while you were speaking about trust and transparency and cultivating trust by being more transparent is, sometimes you have to take the data as it is, right? Like if you have horrible DEI numbers, like just let's call it, right? That's what it is, and we're going to do something about it. And there's a concept, particularly in the environmental space of environmental social governance, of greenwashing, which was trying to coat really bad environmental performance with claims of environmental consciousness to kind of get points. And I think the same thing can happen from an ethics and compliance perspective, trying to cover up bad behavior by making all of these statements, but the actions aren't kind of aligning to the statements. So one of the questions that we got in the Q&A was, do you see an expansion of transparency reports that to date have been limited to only larger companies? Is that something that you see as being part of the future? And I'll let you know, I got some ideas on this one, but I want to hear yours first.
I am all for transparency, right? I think understanding, because I feel like transparency builds accountability, right? And so I believe that owning where you are and who you are at all times is that authenticity. Then telling people this is who I am is that transparency, which then says, particularly if you say, and I want to be better, builds that accountability that is mutual and can be mutually enforced, right? So I think about like my relationship with my best friend, right? If I tell her I feel I feel unhealthy, then I tell her this is my weight. I want to make these changes in my life to be healthier. There's a mutual accountability that says, Asha, are you doing that or not? And I take that analogy to and accountability partners, right? Like we've heard those in all different areas of our lives, but I feel like being transparent is a necessary step for accountability, because we're not on this journey together, alone. And so we have to go there together, and and that's why we have relationships with audit and with other organizations, other departments within our organization, so we can hold each other accountable. And I think it's so important. So is it the future? I hope so. What is in that report, I would have to think about a little bit more, but I do think saying to people, and particularly like these very public failures, where are the case studies? Where are the retros? You already got the fine. Like, can we get a podcast on that? Like, because I want to
Are we going to do the Theranos case study, Asha? Because I'm all in on that.
Like, I want to know. And the reason I want to know those what went wrong is because I hope it will help someone else. And again, that's why this community is so important, because someone else has been there and they can help navigate you through there in a way that has that right level of authenticity, transparency, and then accountability, particularly if that path has worked for them.
Well, you mentioned earlier that doing the right thing is often the driver for this, but it's not always the case. And you see that that companies rebound after issues. And it's not necessarily a fiscal imperative that they be transparent in these ways. How have you been able to help, I guess, any advice for people on trying to get that message across, that profits may rebound, we may come back as a company and be even bigger afterward, but it's still the right thing to do. It's hard to compete good right thing to do versus we don't have to, it'll cost us more and we'll still rebound anyway.
Yeah, I when I was in college, I was student government president my senior year, and I had a rap artist who was coming to my college. I went to Spelman College for undergrad. I had a rap artist who was coming to our college to do a bone marrow drive. At the time he came to do a bone marrow drive, and cancer awareness was a big issue for us just because of the disproportionate effects on the African American community. And so important for us to start that narrative while we're in college so that we could work toward helping it as we grew older. At the time he wanted to come for the bone marrow drive, he also had a video out by the name of Tip Drill, where at the end of the video, he swiped a credit card through a woman's butt. I saw this video and I was planning the bone marrow drive. We told him about why the images he had were so detrimental to the world and to the African American community, and that he should listen to the community about why. We also told him, we are supportive of your sister who needs bone marrow, and we will do this drive. He felt that he did not need to be questioned about his activities outside of this bone marrow drive, and that he should be able to come there and not have to listen to us tell him anything about his music, that the two were separate. We did not agree. He pulled out from the bone marrow drive, canceled it. It started a national protest. He actually said that we canceled it. It started a national discussion about the images of women in the media. Wonderful outcome, but obviously, as someone who both are very important to me, again, authentically important, it did not sit well to me that we started one conversation without starting the other. So I literally almost did not graduate trying to find another partner to partner with us to do that bone marrow drive. And we did. We did both, right? We did the bone marrow drive and we started the national discussion. And the reason I share that story is because I often feel like we don't, what we had to show the world was that we could do both. I'm not, and that's what we have to show business. We're not showing business, you have to choose between doing the right things or making profit. We have to show that the imperative is to do both. And that's, to me, the narrative from ethics and compliance is I want the company to make money too. I want a job.
Absolutely.
Right.
There's no profit, there's no need for compliance.
There's no need for me if you're not in business and you're not making profit, right? But let's figure out how to do both. And I feel like oftentimes in compliance, we position ourselves as this is an either or conversation as opposed to an and conversation. And I think one of the most valuable things that in that story I share is that we can partner with the business to do both. They have to allow us to be partners. And that is always the message that I say to all of my business partners. We are partners. We have to do this together and we have to do both.
I love that message. And I mean, this is language that's oftentimes used in psychology. It's oftentimes used, particularly in organizational psychology, is both and. We can have both of these goals and still maintain our commitment to ethics. And bravo to you and to your crew of people who said, you know what, this just doesn't work, and we're going to have a discussion about how women are being portrayed in the media. Yes, the bone marrow is absolutely a critical matter, but we're not going to not have the other discussion.
Yeah. And
well,
I think
before it's become something in the media on a regular basis.
yes. And I think it's so important, right? And when you're in any position, right? Does your leadership have the commitment to both and? Right? And I think asking that very upfront question and mandating that commitment as we go forward is so important, because I'm here for both and, right? And so, and we can do it together. We have to partner. And so I think just making sure that commitment, and to me, when we look at evaluating an effective compliance program, and I look at the tone from the top bullet, and every time I just chuckle, because I feel like people are looking for words, right? It's not words, it's actions. I want the both and are words and actions. And so let's take it beyond that. Like, we need to make sure in all that we do, we're really thinking about how to make sure the business is successful and it's doing the right thing.
Absolutely. That's really profound. And what a fantastic story. I had not heard that story from you. But I think it's a great example of, sometimes you have to stick with your convictions and your values, even if the consequences, the immediate consequences seem scary.
Yeah. I mean, I got death threats after that. I mean, how dare you? I mean, in handwritten letters, right? People weren't emailing. So they had to find me, send it to me, and do all of that. But I think, it change is hard, and sometimes doing the right thing is hard. But that's the reason we are in these positions, is because we have to push organizations to do what's hard. Because again, and we see with the regulatory world, right? That's why I call ethics and compliance a dance, right? Because it's the regulatory regime gives us a chance to do things on our own and try to make things better. And then when we don't, there's a law passed, and then we're forced to do something different. And then when that may not change, so there's this dance of like, is it a stick or is it a carrot that we have to get through? But it's hard and it's uncomfortable, which is actually a value we have at Conversant, right? No other place, right, has the value of uncomfortable. But it's so important to us because change and doing the right thing is uncomfortable. I had and whistleblowing is
Oh,
uncomfortable.
super. I mean, most people don't wake up and they're like, I think I'm going to make things spicy today. Let's become a whistleblower.
I'm bored. It's Wednesday. Let's shake it up a little.
Shake it up. It's uncomfortable. And so how do we help ourselves as well as the people in our employee population be uncomfortable? And we do a training at Conversant called Conversations, Not Confrontations. And it was the first training I did and created as a chief ethics and compliance officer in our company. Why? Not because it was very compliance oriented, but it leads people to be able to navigate conversations that don't turn into confrontations. And for me, such the underlying reason why a lot of the whistleblowing complaints we get, a lot of the conflicts in the workplace, a lot of the things that could be resolved before they come to us, a lot of the speaking up, a lot of the bystander intervention would happen if people didn't think that their conversations would become confrontations, right? No one wants to get in a bar fight. No one signs up for that, right? And so you tend to retreat or keep in things that you think will be controversial that will turn into confrontations. So how do we equip people with the tools to talk about things and to be on opposite sides of issues without feeling like they will be personally attacked? And that's a difficult skill to learn. But when you learn it, it helps employees go to managers with difficult topics. It helps managers give difficult feedback. And it helps address issues that are tough, like diversity, equity, inclusion, or George Floyd's death, in a way where it's okay to be vulnerable and authentic, even if you're not exactly have the opinion that everyone thinks you should have.
I love that. And, I was moderating a DE&I panel last week, actually on Friday, right before jury selection began here in Minneapolis. And one of the things that was magical about the panel was there was this sense of respect and inclusion and curiosity, and that conversations, like, we started it all with, hey, everyone is born with bias because bias is what keeps you alive, right? You know not to touch a hot stove because you get burned. And so things that look hot, you tend not to touch, right? And so we had this wonderful conversation about, sometimes you just need to have conversations and be curious and be respectful, and you're not going to be vilified because you had this different background or because you don't have this different background. And there was a question in the Q&A. What is it? It is DENI, and as an ampersand, not DENI. DE and I is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is typically put into that social category of environmental, social, and governance. So great questions. Thank you for having us to pause and make sure that everybody's together on this. So we have our signature question, and then there's another question in the chat. So let me ask first the other question in the chat. What do you think is the best way for a CEO or president of a company to demonstrate tone at the top authentically?
So I think consistency is key. And I think, when a CEO reaches out to ensure that their messages to the company have the right tone. When the CEO is interested in metrics or improvement and gives you, if you have that one-on-one with the CEO and the CEO is always canceling, like, how important is this to you? And I think, and asking that CEO, how do you authentically show things that are important to you? Right? Because they will have a pattern of behavior that shows you authentically who they are. Just feed into that consistently and say, well, if that is your cadence, I need ethics to be within that cadence. And that is fitting into who they are, as opposed to you telling them how they should deliver the message. And have checkpoints, right? Check in. How is this working? Is this right? How doing, when you're doing your surveys to see what people feel. See, I mean, who asks on their engagement survey, do you feel that the tone from the top is authentic?
Everybody should be.
But
People
not as many as should are.
Not even enough are doing any engagement surveys. So let's just start there.
anything with the results, but we won't go there. But no, and so I think understanding the perception of authenticity within your organization and your program is so important, because it could be just a miss, right? It could be really authentically given and not authentically received. And so I think understanding that and modifying, right? All of this is about iterations. Like, we shouldn't feel like we have to get anything right the first time. If your code is organized wrong and no one goes to it, try something different, right? If that doesn't work, try something else. Like, no one knows the impact until you can assess the impact. And if the assessment of the impact is that it's not working, try something else.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Asha, thank you so much for being here. We got Lisa Beth mentioned earlier, we always end with the same question. And so we're curious, what's the best thing you've ever learned from a mentor?
The best thing I've ever learned from a mentor is to have fun doing what you're doing. And my most profound mentor actually passed away in 2020 at the age of 48. And what I always saw in her and what she said to me is, are you having fun? Are you enjoying what you're doing? Because life is short. And if you're not enjoying it, it's not right for you. Mm. And that has always been the best advice to me, because when I'm not enjoying it, I don't do it. And when I am enjoying it, I keep doing it. And that to me is the most important thing as we think about, because what's fun, you put your energy into, you're authentic in, you're transparent in. And so those type of things, I mean, think about someone on the dance floor, right? You're having a great time. And it's that kind of energy. If your profession or what you're doing, whether it's the company you're at or the people you're working with, are sucking that out of you, don't do it. And as you see, I'm passionate about ethics and compliance. I'm excited. It's fun for me to feel like we're moving and to strategize and to help us move forward. And that's fun to me.
Wonderful.
That's amazing.
Sage advice.
I am so glad that we had you here today. We have used up our entire hour, but thank you. Thank you for joining us, attendees. This will be available online shortly afterwards for replay. I know there were a lot of people who signed up who weren't able to attend right at this time, but please come back next week where we'll have another great Mentor Core guest. And I hope you all have a wonderful International Women's Week, because I don't think it can be contained by just one day. It's actually the whole month. So enjoy, and thank you, Asha.
Thank you both. Thank you, Lisa Beth. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.